Hello, Ashutosh Sinha. Welcome to Oddballs and Outcasts.
Yeah.
Thanks for making it here.
Thank you.
And before I start asking you all the technical questions, which I hope that don't bore people, why don't you tell everyone about yourself?
It's just a bit strange to hear you call me Ashutosh Sinha.
I know, man. We're not used to the nicknames.
No.
Should I call you by a nickname?
You can call me Bird.
I can call you Bird. Okay. So officially, I'll call you Bird. I think in
as long
the
as I can call you Shahane.
you can definitely.
I see the podcast and I see people call you Pranav, and it's very awkward.
Yeah. So you can call me whatever you want.
Good,
So do you want me to at the end of the video? Do you want me to put it as Ashutosh Sinha or do you want to put it as Bird?
No, there Ashutosh Sinha would be fine.
I can put Bird in brackets or something that way. Yeah.
Sure.
AKA Bird or something
Yeah,
that way in the
yeah.
caption.
Mhm.
But yeah, why don't you go for it?
So I'm Ashutosh, and I'm a PhD student and a researcher at ETH in Zürich, and I work on sustainable materials and living materials. That's my field of research.
That sounds very fancy. Why don't you elaborate?
Thank you. Yeah. So, well, sustainable materials just basically means materials that are good for the environment. So we try and make stuff that is biodegradable, is environmentally friendly, things like that. So we do it in two ways. One is we sort of just use materials that we find naturally in the environment. So, for example, we take wood, and you usually use wood to make paper, for example. So you extract the components that actually make wood, that's called cellulose, and then you take that stuff and you make paper with it. But we make all sorts of other stuff using that cellulose. Another way we make sustainable materials is something we call bioinspiration. So there we sort of look at how natural systems or living organisms work. So the thinking there is just through evolution, any living organism would have sort of perfected ways to do certain things. For example, if you want to create sugars, the people who would probably do it the most efficiently is plants, because they've had millions and millions and millions of years of making sugar by just using light, water, and carbon dioxide. So that's the sort of thinking. So we sort of mimic or take inspiration from biological systems. So that's where the bioinspiration part comes in, to make materials that we can use, basically. And the living material stuff is just mostly what I do. That's we work with living organisms, so it's bacteria, fungi, algae, things like that, and we try and make cool stuff with it. That's the general
What kind of
idea.
cool stuff do you make with bacteria?
So with bacteria, there's certain kinds of bacteria that produce cellulose, the stuff you get from wood, so you don't actually need to chop down a tree and process it.
Okay, what is cellulose? Like what are the benefits of cellulose?
So well, you can, once you extract this cellulose from wood, you can do all sorts of stuff with it. The idea is just that you can get a really, really, really small building block, and the smaller something is, you can basically assemble it to make something bigger. That's the general idea. It's like this, when you get it small enough, it's really just like a white powder, so it would look like powdered sugar.
I don't think we're allowed to talk about white powder on the podcast.
Yeah. That was during my bachelor's, not during my PhD.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was in Amsterdam for my master's. I don't know what that.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that too. Yeah. No, but it's just really like a white powder. And but the cool stuff with this is, so if you put it into water, just take this powder and put it in water at a high enough concentration, it sort of arranges itself into cool shapes. And because it arranges itself into cool enough shapes, it absorbs light. And as it absorbs light, it emits colors. So if you've seen the feathers of a peacock, for example, the feathers of a peacock are not colored because there's dyes or pigments in there, like our t-shirts are, for example. Well, mine's a bad idea, but your t-shirts are. They're colored because of dyes or pigments. We've put something there to make it that color. But for a peacock, for example, it's just the tiny, tiny building blocks inside a peacock feather assembles itself into a cool enough shape. And then as light falls on that peacock feather, it absorbs whatever certain kinds of light and emits another kind of light, and that's why it gives it color. So the advantage of cellulose would be you can make colors without having to add dyes or anything of the sort, and you'd get these holographic or iridescent rainbow-like colors, basically, from using a white powder.
Okay.
So yeah.
And like Are you damaging the trees in any way to extract the cellulose, or what is the way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, trees was just like a general thing I said, but we don't actually use a lot of tree cellulose. You also find cellulose in things like vegetables.
Okay.
So I know in the lab that I work in, it's not my area of expertise, but we have people that use things like thrown away broccoli, thrown away carrots, thrown away apple skins, and they can extract basically this exact same thing from waste streams.
Okay.
So it's already things that are going to be thrown away, and we can get something from that. Another, I think, thing you can get it from is just like paper stuff that people throw away. So even that can be reprocessed into getting cellulose. So our idea is to avoid really damaging the environment in any way. So we take things that people are already going to throw away, and we try and get cellulose from it. I think there's also work because you can also get cellulose from textiles.
Okay.
So there's some work also from clothes that are being thrown away. You can process that into cellulose. Cellulose really is just glucose, like a glucose molecule linked together. It just goes on forever and ever into like one big long chain.
Okay.
That's what makes cellulose. That's the general idea.
And how do you extract cellulose from something like textiles?
So what you would do is you would, you have mechanical treatment and chemical treatments. Mechanical treatment basically just means you take it and you grind it down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, like you really just break it. And chemical treatment would be, okay, you bleach it in some way, you try and break away any of the other sugars or anything that's attached to it, and then you get what you want. So there's a series of chemicals that you add. Maybe not always very sustainable, but there's also ways we try and overcome that.
Why would you say it's not sustainable, and what are the ways you'll try to overcome that?
So that's sort of the problem in a lot of research is we can't really build the way nature builds stuff, you know, because nature will just take like a carbon atom, a nitrogen atom, an oxygen atom and make things because it's a living system. We have to sort of go top down. It's always, if you're destroying something, it's always going to be well destructive. So we can try and minimize the damage we cause, but we're always going to cause a little bit of damage. So it takes some energy. Some of the chemicals that people use sometimes in processing are also toxic. I know they're working in my lab to cut out most of the toxic chemicals, but at a certain point, if you want to bleach something, you've got to use bleach. You know, that's the sort of problems we run into.
And how do you all try to minimize it, the wastage, or the being environmentally unfriendly?
Yeah, well, some of the stuff we do, firstly, it is from the sourcing. So we try and pick up stuff only that's going to be thrown away in the first place. So we try and assess, okay, if this thing was just thrown away, what would the impact on the environment be? And if we use it to reprocess it to make something that lasts longer, what would the environmental impact of that be? So it's a lot of calculations that go into it. It's not always just one way. But yeah. Or, like I said, we try and replace chemicals with something a bit more sustainable, such as bacterial cellulose. You don't actually need to tear down anything, use any chemicals. You just have the bacteria, you grow them, and as the bacteria grow, they start producing the cellulose on their own. And you get like a nice layer of cellulose that the bacteria themselves produce.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and when you guys use all these things like bacteria and fungi and all that,
Yeah.
Has the research already been done, or is it a constant process? Is everyone constantly looking for newer solutions?
Yeah, I mean, one thing in research is you always want to be the first to publish something, and then once somebody's already doing it, you sort of lose interest because somebody's already done it. So everybody's trying something new usually, but I think there's quite a few people now that have taken a lot of interest in fungal materials, for example. We see, I was trying to work on a paper on fungal materials a couple of months ago, and we really had to rush it out because we see that there's a lot of people that are doing things very similar, but it's sort of a good thing, you know. The more research you have in something, the more widely accepted it becomes. But right now I would still say it's in a sort of incipient stage. I don't think we've gone very far ahead. I mean, there's some companies that are working with mycelium based leather, for example. So it's a vegan leather that they've made.
Interesting.
Yeah, that they've made from fungi. And what's the actress that played Padme in Star Wars? I forgot her name.
Didn't watch Star Wars.
Sorry. I think it's Natalie Portman.
Okay.
Natalie Portman was like involved in one of these brands. I think I had an old professor who used to tell the story that there was some fashion brands that reached out to them for vegan leather. It's kind of cool. And
kind of cool, kind of woke too.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of cool, kind of woke. And so he was featured in one of these fashion magazines next to Kim Kardashian.
Okay.
And he said that's the first time his daughter had any respect for anything he ever did. So when he saw his research up there.
But what is the process of like making this vegan leather? How do you go about it?
So the fungus itself, it really is the kind of thing that grows on your bread, if you leave it out for too long. So you see it already has this sort of fiber-like texture. It's, it's very thread-like. So it's sort of optimum for textiles. Different people do it in different ways. You usually put the fungus, you try and grind it down, or you separate the threads as best as possible. And then you try and add some stuff that makes it smooth, essentially. And some people press it hot, some people don't. But the inherent properties of the fungus itself is good enough for leather, because leather ultimately is also, even our skin, it's just tanned proteins. You take whatever you take skin from a cow or wherever you get the leather from, and then you add some chemicals, and then that's how you get the leather texture. So it's a very similar process.
Okay. And how much do these things cost compared to?
Much more expensive for
much
now.
more expensive.
Simply because we don't have the kind of scale. Cows are, or maybe here not cows, but.
Remember where you are.
Yeah.
First.
Sorry. Yeah. But whatever animal it is whose hide that you're using, usually you have a lot of them, and then they're killed for whatever reason. They've gotten old, or they've you need their meat or whatever it may be, and then you use the hide for whatever you want.
Yeah.
So fungus, of course, takes a long time to grow. You need the right conditions, things like that. So for now, there's very few companies that are really making any leather at scale.
Okay.
But it's a sort of boutique product for maybe high fashion, not for regular consumers yet.
Okay.
But maybe in a couple of years, with the research going in the direction that it's going, when more and more people find something interesting, there's more and more money thrown at it, more and more companies start to feel interested, then I think you will probably in a couple of years see something.
But why would people prefer the vegan leather over, say, faux leather or something that way?
Again, with faux leather, then you're using a lot of non-biodegradable materials and chemicals. That's the thing. So there's a lot of plastics involved in it, for example. So polyurethane, I think, is the exact compound. I'm not an expert, don't ask me specifics. But I think the main problem there is that it's not biodegradable, and then it's sort of just like accumulating plastics up in the environment.
Okay.
You can't use microorganisms to tear it down. You mostly just have to burn it or leave it in a landfill. Whereas this, it's organic, there's some biodegradable element in there, though you can sort of debate when, after all the processing, how biodegradable does it remain. But, there is some promise there that, there is a way that we could probably make it more biodegradable in the future, even if it's not 100% perfect right now.
Yeah.
Whereas with plastics, I think it's a bit more difficult.
And given how brands are going, has anyone reached out to you guys saying, we want something in this range, like sportswear or something that way?
Not to me, but I know
two people.
Yeah, I know there are people. There's, of course, like fashion brands. There's some companies that work with, whether it's sofas or watches or something like that. I think there's a lot of interest in that direction. Yeah.
Okay.
But again, these are premium brands.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not regular brands.
But even your regular brands can always charge a premium for that, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Like, say something you get for 2,000-3,000 rupees, you can just charge, say, 10,000, and you can say, okay, this is a sustainable thing.
Yeah.
And you can explain the entire process about how it's being made and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, that could be possible. But I think, again, the question would be scale. If there's a demand for that, I don't know. So far, I know that it's mostly the boutique companies that are approaching it. I mean, there's bigger brands, of course, also that are wealthy and target a wealthier demographic, but I don't know if there's movement in that direction.
And the kind of work you're doing, is there a demand for those kind of products?
So for now, I'm not actually making a finished product. My research is mostly fundamental, so I'm trying to solve like some basic problems that we have in creating fungal materials. For example, there's something we call the performance sustainability trade-off.
Okay.
So it's how well a material performs, whatever you want it to perform. You know, how strong is it, how tough is it, can it hold water, whatever, you know, whatever property you want it to, versus how sustainable it is. So usually you lose one to gain the other.
Okay.
So if you want to make something very, very strong, then usually you process it a lot more, and then it's not as sustainable as it was at the beginning. So that's why my work is sort of to figure out natural ways to correct that balance, to see if we can make something both high performing and highly sustainable. So that's sort of where I focus. So I don't really have a finished product yet that I'm working on, just like these technical aspects.
But I'm sure your research has resulted in finished products being made. Like, can you give me examples of those kind of things?
I mean, not finished products yet, but yeah, we're also working with sort of the fungal leather in the fungal leather direction. So you know, we're trying to make leather that is nice and stretchable, strong, while at the same time not being something that can, you know, be very toxic to the environment.
And as of now, is there any idea of how much it's going to cost, the finished product?
No.
It's still in the very initial stage?
Yeah, it's still in the very initial stages. I mean, so there's when you start with a PhD, you usually work with a grant. So your professors, whoever they may be, have an idea, and they write a grant to whatever agency that they've applied for, and then they usually have the scope of your research mapped out already. So mine is what they call like a fundamental grant, not an application grant.
Okay.
So my job really is to sort of lay the foundations, and then I'm sure later on there will be somebody who will come and perfect the finished product.
All right.
So usually then at that stage, once you sort of prove that the fundamentals work, then somebody, usually a company, puts in some money. You know, right now at the basic stages, usually it's just the government that's funding you.
So right now it's the Swiss government that's funding you guys.
Yes.
And you're working where?
In Zurich.
What's the name of your, are you in a uni or college?
ETH in Zurich, yeah.
Okay. Is it a college or what is it?
It's a university.
It's a university, okay. So they are entirely the entire program is funded by the government?
Well, not the whole university, but my grant.
Your grant.
My grant is funded.
Okay. And how many of you guys are there?
So currently it's just me,
Okay.
because the previous PhD student has already graduated. So he finished in 2023, I think. So he's gone. So right now it's just me. Of course, it's my professor and my supervisor. But they're the ones that actually wrote the grant.
Okay.
So yeah, just paid directly by the grant, it's just me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's nice. You're reaping the benefits of the Swiss government.
Exactly, yeah.
But what does your daily routine look like?
So sort of the good thing about academia is that I don't have like a fixed 9-to-5 job. I'm somebody who likes to go a bit later, but then I can stay a bit later. Usually I'll go to work at around 9:30. And then it really depends on the day. If I have a lot of experiments in the lab, then I will stay for really, really late. Otherwise, if I just have some laptop work, I will leave by 5:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's something that has to be done from there only. Even the laptop work, you can't do it remotely.
I can do it remotely, yeah. It's quite flexible. So, for example, if I'm just working on analyzing whatever data I have, or if I'm just writing stuff, I usually just... sometimes I don't even tell my professor. I just say, hey, if he asks me, hey, where are you? I would say, hey, I'm working from home. Because I don't have any experiments to run.
Okay.
So I just want to stay home, you know, drink some coffee and work on my paper on my own, and that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
The work-life balance is really good.
That's
I think.
good.
Yeah.
And what are the deliverables like? Do you all have any like monthly targets or sort?
Not monthly targets, but I have to publish 3 papers in good, reputable journals before I graduate. It's not really a written rule, but it's an unwritten rule, you know. So if you want to finish your PhD in time, usually you should have 3 papers ready at the end of your PhD.
So are you also simultaneously working on those papers?
Yeah, exactly. So I had one in 2022.
Oh, it's already out?
Yeah.
You should have sent it to me, man.
Okay.
Damn. I would have gone through it. How many pages that was? How many pages is it?
I don't know, 13, 14, something.
Oh, that's not much. I was thinking it's going to be like a 50 or 100 or something.
No, that'll be my thesis. I will send that to you at the end.
I'm not going to read that. You can just point out the main things, like just highlight it and just send me screenshots.
I'll have a 20-minute presentation. You can attend.
Yeah, you can do that. You can do that right now also. Just tell us about it.
It's not done yet, so I can't.
But tell us about the 2022 paper. Like, what was that about? And what was the findings that even you were shocked by when you went through it? The entire process.
It wasn't a very shocking paper. Like I said, it's
it
a
wasn't
very
a shocking
fundamental paper.
Okay.
So
that'll be shocking for me because I'm a layman. I have no idea.
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was a cellulose-based paper. So we made something like a cellulose foam. So something like styrofoam, like thermocol. but made completely out of cellulose. So,
what is thermocol otherwise made of?
Good question. It's one of these polyurethane-like compounds.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know the chemical exactly.
All these words I hated in school, man.
Yeah,
all
exactly.
These compounds and these ureethylene and whatever
exactly.
the fuck that is. It's crazy.
I don't know. I don't know what styrofoam is made of. Yeah.
Okay.
Polystyrene probably. Styrofoam. That would make sense.
What is polystyrene?
it's just a chemical compound.
Okay.
Doesn't matter to you if I said polystyrene, polyurethane. That doesn't make any difference.
No, it doesn't at all.
Yeah,
but it does for people watching. I mean, they'll be like, they'll just be googling every 2 minutes.
Yeah, Google styrofoam. You know what thermocol is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just you take idea with thermocol basically is that you have this chemical, whatever it may be. I don't remember the name. Don't shoot me. And there's a lot of air inside. That's what gives it the fluffiness. Basically, yeah, these air pockets. And so that's what we do with cellulose. Essentially, we call it an aerogel. Because it's like a gel, like a toothpaste gel, but only it's not water, it's air.
Okay.
That's the stuff that's inside it. So it's a foam. So we made a cellulose foam. And now it's a bit more technical. What we were trying to see with this is whether it can form amyloids. So yes, exactly. Yeah, I know. So when you have proteins, whatever proteins you may have, your egg white, for example, is a protein. And when you heat it up, the protein will coagulate. So
what does that even mean?
You have white liquidy stuff, it becomes solid stuff.
Okay,
right?
Yeah. You can just say that, man.
Yeah, sorry.
Stop being so fancy.
Sorry. So like when you boil an egg, what's happening is that your proteins are basically just collapsing into one another, and that's what makes it solid.
Yeah.
That's the general idea there. Sorry. So that is what we call disordered aggregation. So it's coming together to form like these clumps, aggregates, whatever you may call it, but there's no order to it. It's just like clumping together. But in the same way, if there's a particular kind of process that you trigger in egg white, for example, instead of coming together and clogging like a clump, it would turn into a sort of thread. And these thread-like fibers are much stronger, than this clump that usually forms out of eggs. And we were trying to see if just exposing it to cellulose is one of the ways you can trigger egg proteins to turn into a thread instead of a clump. That was the general idea that we were looking at. Why it's important is because eggs are not the only proteins that do this. For example, people who suffer from Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, it's the same thing that's going on in their brains, is that they have natural proteins, and instead of either staying in their natural form, like in their liquidy form, or clumping, what's happening is they're forming these thread-like things. And these thread-like things then can't be broken down by your body.
Okay.
And they accumulate in your brain. And that's how people get Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Like, this is what causes these diseases. So when you want to understand how these threads form in your brain, you try to figure out, okay, so if I want to figure out a way to break these threads, I need to figure out how you make these threads. So what are the things that trigger these threads to form? And so we were trying to see if exposing it to cellulose is one of the way you can make liquid proteins into these thready proteins. That was the general thing. And the answer is yes.
Okay.
That actually exposing certain nano forms of cellulose, so instead of just like the big wood form of cellulose, you break it down further and further and further and further until it's like really nano size. That cellulose can cause liquid proteins basically to turn into these thread-like proteins. That was the general thing that we were trying to see. The idea also is that since we were looking at egg proteins particularly, these we call them hen egg white lysozymes. That's the name of the protein. So these egg proteins also have antibacterial properties. So you can use them to kill bacteria essentially. So we wanted to see that if you have this foam and you coat it with this egg protein, can then it act as a wound healing thing, so like if you're hurt, instead of putting a band-aid, can you put like one of these cellulose things with amyloids, and would they have an antimicrobial function? And I think there's some positive research in that direction as well that shows that it can absolutely.
So where are we in terms of that research before it's properly on shelves and people can actually do it?
It will take some time, I think.
Okay.
Currently there's also just more effective ways to do it. For example, people do it with silver. So instead of silver, so instead of using proteins, you can use silver and coat cellulose essentially with it, and that also has an antimicrobial effect.
Okay.
So it really depends once again, it's a question of scale, you know. Right now we're just proving stuff can happen, and then when industry maybe throws a bit more money our way, we can figure out how best to make it happen in a way that it can hit your shelves, essentially.
So basically, after the research, what's the next step? Like, you're done with your bit. Then after that, what's the next step?
So there's different kinds, I mean, maybe different rules in different countries, but one of the things that happens in Switzerland is then you apply for another grant. Sometimes you partner with an industry partner. So you identify like, okay, there's this pharmaceutical company that might be interested in something like this. So you approach them and say, hey, if you put up half the money, the Swiss government will put the other half up. You know, maybe the patents can be yours, whatever, and the research will be carried out here. This is the general plan that we're working with. Would you be interested? And then usually you have an industry partner say, yes, no, okay, let's do this. And then you apply for a grant together, and then they would hire usually somebody we call a postdoc, so a postdoctoral student, somebody who's finished his doctorate, and then they work towards a finished product with that.
So is that something you would be doing, or?
Well, it really depends if I get a grant like that. And also, job market is a bit tough. It's not always easy. I also am not sure if I want to stay in Switzerland or move to the Netherlands, you know. So there's a lot of considerations. But I would be interested in something to follow up my research,
Okay. And do you think the pharma industry is moving towards these kind of things? Do you think there is enough interest, enough money?
Yes.
Money, I'm sure there is, but is there enough?
Yeah. So we have a big problem that is antimicrobial resistance. So we have a lot of antibiotics that are prescribed willy-nilly. Like here, you know, I lived here for 20 years, 22 years, and every time, even if you had a viral infection, the doctor is going to write you an antibiotic prescription. Which makes no sense.
But if it works, then it does make sense.
Yeah, but a virus is not killed by an antibiotic.
So what does it do then?
The antibiotic only kills bacteria. That's what an antibiotic is there for.
So is the virus still there in your system? Or?
Yeah, the only way to get rid of a virus is if your body naturally clears it.
Okay.
I mean, of course, there's particular antiviral drugs that you can use to target particular viruses, but like the flu, there's nothing. You just have to drink soup and drink water and hope it flushes out of your system. An antibiotic has absolutely nothing to do with your viral infection.
So why do you think doctors are prescribing that?
There's a couple of things. One, sometimes I remember, I mean, because I also studied pharmacy in my bachelor's, so a lot of doctors would say a couple of things. First is, you know, they just want to be safe because we don't have time to like run cultures. That's the way it's done. Like if I go to Switzerland and I have a throat infection, they'll say, okay, go home, come back in 5 days. If it's not gone, then we'll see. Because most likely 99% of the time it's a viral thing. It'll go away. If it still hasn't gone, if you have things like a scratchy throat, other like a rash or something that makes them think, okay, this may be bacterial, then they will take a little sample of your throat, you know, and then they will check, okay, this is a bacteria. Then they will select a particular antibiotic and then they will cure it with that. Whereas here we don't have the time to do all that. So doctors usually just write an antibiotic to be safe. Some say, oh, there's a risk of super infection. So when there's already a virus that's infecting you, you know, your immunity is a bit down, and then maybe a bacteria can also infect you on top of that. So they're like, yeah, we're just being safe. But honestly, sometimes you feel they're doing it because the person has shown up at the doctor, and if the doctor just sends them home with paracetamol low, people will feel like, yeah, doctor ne chuna laga, you know, he just took my $500 and he didn't even write me a prescription. Like I remember I had a neighbor who used to love getting a saline injection. You know, she would go and saline ki bottle chadati thi wo.
Is that a kink or something? Like, do people have that?
Apparently, but it's just like when she felt sick, she was like, oh, you know, I need to hydrate. Like, if you want to hydrate, just drink water. You don't need to put a banana bag. Exactly. People also do this when they're hungover. You know, they're like, oh, I've had too much alcohol. They put a saline injection.
They did that to a friend of ours in Goa.
Did they? Yeah. But you do that if somebody is unable to drink water. So if he kept throwing up,
he wasn't conscious enough.
Well,
so.
that would also explain why they put it into a friend of yours in Goa. Is it a friend
of
that
ours? Yeah.
Okay.
He's a friend of ours. Yeah.
I know which friend we're talking about. Okay. Yeah.
Let's not name him and get him into trouble.
He should know about medical professionals.
He wasn't conscious enough to be consulted about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, so in a case where the patient's unconscious, sure, like you would put a saline solution, but like, yeah, people just love to get like unnecessary treatment from doctors. So I think here they love writing antibiotic prescriptions. And so we have a real problem of resistance, is that bacteria are now getting used to these antibiotics, and they say, okay, then these bacteria are not killed by it. and then we are having more, and then there's fewer and fewer antibiotics we can use. So if there's ways to sort of treat bacterial infections, even if they're just like topical, as we call it, infections on the skin, without having to use any antibiotics, the pharma industry is absolutely interested in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But are they willing to go the next level and put the money in and stuff like that?
I'm sure they are, but keep in mind it's a pharma industry. They don't tell you what they're researching most of the time. Yeah. So it's secretive, and very often what also happens is they don't put in the money at the beginning. This is very common in the US, for example. I think it's all new chemical compounds, or like 90% of new chemical compounds that have been developed for pharmaceutical use in the US were developed with government funding. And then you just have a pharmaceutical company come in and buy the patent.
Okay, yeah.
And then they just keep a patent on it forever. You know, that's quite common. So I don't know if they're necessarily spending as much in research and development as they need to be.
Yeah.
I think there was also a case where, I mean, not a case, but like the situation in the US where they spent more, of course, on marketing than they have ever spent on research and development, you know? So I don't know if they're
because they are on these news channels during prime time, Pfizer and all of that. They are advertising.
Yeah, that's crazy in the US that you can advertise like real, like okay, here paracetamol and stuff. You know, OTC drugs, sure you can advertise, but they're actual things like Alzheimer's drugs, Parkinson's drugs. They're advertising on TV. It's insane.
What do you think about that? Like, you think that should be banned?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it should be up to your doctor, to your pharmacist to decide what drugs you need. I mean, what's a patient sitting at home know about a pharmaceutical formulation from an ad? You know, just because, I don't know, Brad Pitt was in it. Now, please give my grandpa that. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and they create a storyline also. Like, he starts off sick and then he gets well at the end of it, and then people think, okay, this can work for me.
Exactly. And then you have the like side effects may include blah 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 blah.
Yeah, exactly, and no one's gonna see that. Like, they have the fine print at the bottom, and no one's really reading that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that definitely should be.
I absolutely think pharmaceutical advertisement should be banned. Yeah, I mean, there's 2 or 3 countries in the world that allow it in the first place.
Does the UK allow it? I'm not sure.
I don't think they do. And as it is, you don't have a choice. You go to the NHS and whatever your doctor tells you, that's what you take.
No, but I do see Alzheimer-related ads on
really?
television. I'm not exactly sure
that
whether
advertise a drug or.
I don't remember. I don't want to like say something to be on the safe side, but I'm not sure.
It could be for like care facilities and things like that.
Could be. Yeah. I can check that up. But do the American pharma companies reach out to you guys? Like, does that ever happen?
I mean, I'm sure. Me, no.
No, but
my
like
lab,
people in the same field.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, the pharma companies are big. You know, they're everywhere. So of course, there's huge European pharma industries already. So I don't know how much US involvement is there here, but I'm sure there's some partnership going on all the time.
What are the European ones, the big ones?
Novo Nordisk. I don't know if you know that.
No. What do they make? Any reputable drug?
I think insulin. I think is a big Novo Nordisk thing. There's also what's that? AstraZeneca.
Okay.
Yeah. There's other chemical companies like BASF. There's quite a few. I think there's quite a few in Switzerland itself, pharmaceutical companies that work on various things.
So I think that's why the government is like putting money into it, right? Because it'll also propel the companies and it'll also be beneficial to the people. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you look at most countries, the reason they break through is because they usually have one big technology that nobody else in the world does, and they sort of then can use that to fund more stuff. So all countries want to spend more in research and development, because then they might be the country that has that one product. Like for example, I think it's chips manufacturing, like nano chips that go everywhere. There's one Dutch company that has like 97% off, because they're the only ones with the technology to like make the spacing in the chips, because it requires like nano scale level spacing, and I think they're the only company in the world that can do it.
Okay.
And so everything just runs through them. So if that one company shuts down, you're screwed. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
But this is where the US comes in, right? They always want to be the first ones. They'll probably try to buy them out or do something.
Exactly, and they've got the money to roll stuff through, you know. But no, I mean, these countries also have enough money. Like Switzerland has enough money also.
But does Netherlands have?
It's also a rich country, I would say, yeah. And there's also huge companies there. Unilever, for example, is a big one in the Netherlands. Dutch State Mines is another big one. So yeah, they have their big corporations as well. It's not just a US monopoly, I guess.
Okay. And like, what was your reason to do a PhD? Like, is there a lot of money in it, or is it something you were really passionate about? What is the?
I wish there was a lot of money in it. That would be great if there was a lot of money in it. No,
but how does someone like go about the entire process?
Well, I sort of wanted to stay in research. That was my thing. So during my master's, I did a research master's. So I was doing a lot of like research research projects with my supervisor, and I really liked. So I was working with fungal materials, and I thought it was really cool. I thought it was some real sci-fi shit, you know, that you take a fungus and you make leather from it, or you make a brick from it, or whatever it is that we were doing at the time. I thought it was really cool. And I told him that I wanted to stay in research, and I think he gave me pretty good advice, and he's like, yeah, okay, then you look for some project anywhere in the world, really, that does something that you want to do. There's a lot of times people just like decide what university they want to go to, and then they like back derive, okay, I want to go to Harvard, and now let me find whatever project they have at Harvard, and I'll apply to all of them. That really wasn't the way I went about it. I wanted to stay in this field. I found a really good it wouldn't necessarily have been a PhD, you know, if I was just told, hey, you can do like a 2-year research project on this field just as a job, I would have done that happily. But this PhD came around, and I think it was really interesting, the topic, and so I just applied for it. Okay. That was the general idea.
And before that, you did your master's in the Netherlands.
Yes.
What was that in?
It was bioinspired innovation, so bioinspired materials, basically. The thing that I said in the beginning, that we take inspiration from nature. That was the general idea.
Just brought about that curiosity? Because you were in the pharma, you were studying pharmacy and all that. How do you suddenly move to that?
You know, the joke we made about not wanting to remember chemical names, that was really my problem in pharmacy, because I could not bring myself to care about chemistry. I really couldn't. The patient interface in pharmacy was really not something I wanted to do, you know. So in my 4th year, I told my professor that, hey, I want to do something different when I was in my bachelor's, and he had suggested this project of using fungi to break down hair or chicken feathers or whatever contains keratin, because it's the same material that's in your hair as in chicken feathers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, of course, it's a slightly different form, but the general material is the same. So that was my project in my bachelor's, and that's what I was working on. And I thought it was interesting, and so then I had this interest on, okay, let me work on these living organisms doing cool stuff with this, you know. And the first thing I saw was a potential program in Canada where they were making solar panels with bacteria. And I thought, well, that was the coolest thing. But, well, for some reason that fell through. And I really wasn't looking at Europe, because I have a lot of friends who are in the US. My first cousin's in the US, and I thought, okay, US. I have my first cousin on the other side is in Canada, so I was really thinking, okay, it's either going to be the US or Canada. I wasn't looking at Europe at all. And then actually my mother was searching on things that I told her about, like, oh, I think fungi is really cool, etc., etc. And then she said, oh, there's this program in the Netherlands, and they're working on fungi.
So do places in the US have a similar sort of program?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not the exact same thing. You would see maybe a general biotechnology master's or something of the sort, and then you would go and say, okay, is there research happening in this university that is sort of similar to that stuff? So I think there's very good researchers in universities all over the world, and so of course also in the US. I think there's good stuff in Northeastern, MIT, all over the place. There's good stuff happening on fungi, microbiology in general, in material science. Yep. Okay,
but in this field of yours, where do you think it's headed? Like, what sort of research is being prioritized the most at this point?
In the microbiology field? Yeah. I think there's a lot of focus on the materials aspect right now. So trying to make sort of new commercial goods that we can with it. I think there's a lot of focus in packaging. So really, because that's where a lot of waste is these days, we throw away a lot of packaging material. And I think there's some work in food, like alternative meat, for example, is a big thing in Europe. Yeah. And probably in the US as well. I don't know a lot about that.
But is it healthy? Is it sustainable? Because it's all factory made and stuff like that.
I mean,
like say something like a vegan meat or something that way, is it?
All meat is processed in a factory at the end of it. It's not like we don't eat farm to table meat here, right? Yeah. So also when you eat chicken nuggets, like what's happening to that? You're going to get bio slop in the end, it's going to go through a grinder. So it really depends. Like I personally, I'm not a big fan of consuming alternative meat. For me, it's just if I want to eat something vegetarian, I'll eat something vegetarian. I don't need my vegetarian stuff to taste like meat. If I want meat, I'll just eat the meat.
Because I tried in Bali, I tried something called a vegan egg.
Yeah.
Which even Ranka did, and I hated it. And even he did it. Because I've had the egg how it's supposed to be had, the boiled egg or the half fry or something, and that's how it tastes. And then I had this, it was just atrocious in
Makes
comparison.
sense. I mean, we have some companies that have made like vegan chicken, which I think is close by, but like chicken doesn't really taste like anything,
Yeah.
So if you put enough spices, then everything tastes like chicken. There's that AIB paneer samajh ke kha jaye. It's really that, So for me, I would just rather eat the paneer than go through the whole vegan meat process. But there's a huge demand because people want to sort of wean off of meat these days because of the environmental concerns, and so they want to eat something alternative, for example.
Yeah.
And fungal proteins is a big thing because mushrooms have a good deal of protein in them. So, and they already have this thread-like, fiber-like texture that you need in meat. So it's sort of optimum for alternative meats, I think.
So mushrooms is like what, initiated people towards fungi and stuff like that because of the protein in that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things, of course. So you have these thread-like things, these fungi, and when they come together, they knot, and that's how you get a mushroom from them, ultimately. So different people use different phases of it. So in the alternative meat thing, yeah, absolutely, that's what drew it to them, because they know mushrooms are so nutritious, so you can use the fibers as well instead of having to use the finished product. Some people use the finished mushroom. But for material science application, it was really the kind of proteins that are in there, the texture, how it feels, etc., etc. So that maybe didn't have anything to do with the mushroom.
Okay. And you also, sorry.
No, sorry, I'm just saying it helps people imagine, when you say, the technical term is mycelium. You say mycelium-based materials, people are like, you say mushroom materials, and okay, that's interesting. What's mushroom material? Even though we don't actually, some do, but most people don't actually use the mushroom. They're still in the early stages of the fungus life cycle.
But are there any like fancy things that can be made out of mushrooms?
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, people use, there's research also of using finished mushrooms to then reprocess it down to make the sort of stuff that I'm making again. But yeah, it's possible. Ultimately, it's just the thread-like stuff just bundled together. That's what a mushroom is.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you've done something disgusting in terms of researching worms as well, right?
Yes. Well, that was because, so our immune system have these cells that go and attack bacteria or fungi or whatever it is that ail us, so whatever infects us, we have these immune cells that eat them, essentially.
Yeah.
And there's these worms called wax moths that have a very similar immune system in terms of the cellular response.
And they are found inside the body, human body.
No, not the worms.
Oh, thank God! Yeah.
No. These worms are found in, the sort of, they're pest of beehives. So they're found and they eat stuff that the bees make. Basically, they're a parasite of the bees.
Okay.
So you get them, they really look disgusting. They're worms, and they ultimately form moths. That's what they are. They're wax moths. That's why they're called wax moths. And so they have a similar cellular immune system to us. Like their cells are similar to our cells. So I was working with fungi that are pathogenic, so fungi that can cause diseases in humans. And I would inject these fungi that can cause diseases into humans into these worms. So that we could
see how they react and stuff.
Exactly. So to see immune system. So instead of using mice, which have ethical concerns, because people don't want to see, they're testing it on animals.
Yeah, I'm like, just kill all the insects on the planet. Yeah,
exactly.
Let's just do that.
Yeah, that's just it. Exactly. So people find it more tolerable if we kill insects.
So what did you learn from the research?
Well, my research wasn't that successful. But I mean, the model works. People can absolutely use these moths to test how pathogenic fungi are. But what I got out of it was a lot of nightmares. From
Tell
the
me
worms.
about them.
I remember there was this one. There was one where every time I injected a worm, it would scream. So that's something that I.
How
had,
does a
like,
worm scream?
It's like a high pitched shriek. That's
Can you imitate it?
Anyway, yeah. So that was a recurring nightmare that I used to have, that I'm injecting worms and they're screaming. But there was one where I remember I was in my studio in the Netherlands, and I'm in my bed and I look up and I see a worm crawling on my arm and I swat it away. I'm like, what the hell?
Did it follow you home? Like, was it on your in your clothes
this
from
is
the
me
lab?
this is me dreaming.
Oh, this is you dreaming.
This
Okay.
is me dreaming. And then I look outside the window and then I see another worm sort of like creeping on the window. And I'm like, what the fuck? How did it come inside my window? I throw it out and I close my window. And then I look on the other windows and then all the moths start flying. You know, it's like Alfred Hitchcock, the birds.
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
not birds, it's worms that are attacking me. That was the scariest shit. I came next day and I told my supervisor, I'm dreaming of the worms. He's like, yeah, I do too. Nothing we can do about it.
But was there anyone you were working with who was like passionate about it? Because I don't particularly think anyone would want to study insects and worms that much.
I don't think that's true. I think there's...
They were like really passionate about it.
Yeah.
Like
I
they
mean,
had insect posters on their walls, sort of passion.
We used to collaborate with this guy at the University of Amsterdam, and his whole thing was just rearing these moths. You know, and we'd go to him and tell him, oh, this is the food that they like, and you know, this is when they turn into these silk cocoons, and he used to collect the little cocoons that they used to make, and he was a cool guy, I think. But yeah, that would freak me out. I did it for 6 months, and that was it for me. I don't want to work with worms again.
But why did you pick that? Did you find that there was a lot of research to be done in that field, or
again, it was so I just do things I think are cool, and that I thought was really
I don't think
cool.
how working with worms is cool.
I thought it was very interesting, because if somebody told me, oh, we don't have to use animal models or humans and you can just use these worms and get the exact same result, I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to be part of something new. You know, and this is like very few researchers around the world were doing this.
Okay.
And so I said, okay, well, if it's something new and up and coming, then I want to do it too. So I was there. It was a good, fun experience, but never again.
And how are these like worms preserved, or how are they brought to the lab? Like, what's the process?
Tupperware containers. We had them really in Tupperware containers, but it would have like a metal net on top, so that they could breathe, basically. But yeah, otherwise it was just like a standard Tupperware box.
Do you have like any pictures or videos of it?
I don't. Maybe.
Yeah, we can just put it along with, as you're talking about it. We'll just put a few pictures.
I'll look for them.
We'll discuss people out.
Yeah, cool. They look like caterpillars. Really, yeah, like thick, fat caterpillars.
No, but I'm talking about generally the lab and stuff. Like, do you have?
I don't have photos of the lab because it was a highly. It's an infectious lab, so you don't usually take out your phone and
Okay.
do stuff.
So
like
do you
that.
go in hazmat suits and stuff
Not
like that?
hazmat suits, but like mask, glove, goggles, and lab coat. Yeah.
Okay.
For hazmat suits, it would be even higher. And so if I was working with like TB or something, then I would wear a hazmat suit. But this doesn't infect you unless you're like injecting it into your bloodstream or you eat it or something of the sort. So you would just have a mask on to make sure you don't touch your hand here accidentally, and gloves on, so you would take it off at the end of the day. I did accidentally poke myself once, but I was smart enough not to inject. So
thank God.
Yeah.
What would happen if you would have?
Well, the fungus I was using was multi-drug resistant, so maybe not good things. But yeah, usually if you have a bloodstream infection in that smaller quantity, your body takes care of it.
That could have been your
especially.
superhero arc.
Worm Man.
Yeah, you should have gone for it. That would have been much better than Ant-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should.
True. Yeah.
We can pitch it to Marvel.
You could make a shield as a cocoon.
Yeah, exactly. That's
avoid
cool.
damage. Yeah.
That's cool, actually. Actually, you should go back and try it.
Yeah.
You're
Maybe.
planning to go back to the Netherlands, right? You can do that.
Yeah, maybe not for the worms, but yes, yeah.
But that research about the worms was done. Where is that now? Like, has it moved on? What are they doing?
I think there's other labs also that are working with these worms. They're trying to establish it as a model system. So, in science, something is accepted if enough people do it, basically. So right now, I don't know if a lot of people are doing it. But at the time, I think there were like 50 odd good papers. And I think that's a good start.
And I want to talk to you about the researchers, because science is an evolving process. There's new research coming in.
Yeah.
So the people who've written papers, spent years doing that, suddenly have their theories or whatever disproved. How resistant are they towards accepting that change? And they try everything they do to suppress any new information coming in, right? Because then their information is kind of outdated.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they suppress it. It's just, of course, they're resistant. Nobody likes to be proven wrong.
Yeah.
Of course. So I think it sort of helps because then they ask really tough questions to whatever researcher is putting forward. Like, for example, there was very recently a research paper that was published somewhere in South Korea where they claimed that they had made either a superconductor or a semiconductor. I don't remember. I'm not a physicist. That's why. And they made this claim that at room temperature or something incredible, because usually you have to work in like these really cold conditions to get this particular experiment to work. And they said, oh, we did it at room temperature, and everybody was like, oh, this is insane. This has changed the course of science. And of course, people were a bit resistant to it because they're like, oh, this sounds a bit too good to be true. And then multiple scientists then reciprocated this research, and they couldn't replicate it. Sorry, not reciprocate, replicate.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you're like, okay, maybe there's something fishy going on here, you know? And so yeah, you get that a lot, you know, researchers make claims and then they are disproven, or the people who are trying to disprove them, they get disproven. I think it's a healthy system of, like, we call it peer review. So you don't just publish as in, okay, I send it to a journal and the journal publishes it. So what usually happens is I submit my article to a journal. Then first the editor takes a call. Okay, is this suitable for my journal? Is this high quality enough for my journal? If you pass through that phase, then they send it to reviewers. So reviewers are usually just your peers in the field. It could be anybody, it could be me, it could be you, whoever is the expert in the field. They will send it to usually 2 or 3 reviewers, and then they will all write reports. They will read the paper and say, okay, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, this could work, this couldn't work, and then they send it to the editor saying, hey, these are my comments. And then the editor would send the comments to you, you respond to the comments, and then if both the reviewers and the editor are satisfied, then your paper gets published.
Okay.
So this is, at least in the good quality journals, this is the way it goes. So that usually, I think, guarantees a certain degree of scientific respectability. We can talk about whether it's fair on the researchers or not, the way that this is handled. But yeah, I think in terms of the quality of research we put out, I think it's a good thing.
Okay, but why do you think it's not fair?
So you don't get paid as a reviewer. You don't get paid to publish in a journal. You pay the journal.
Oh, okay.
So if I write an article and I submit to, I'm going to take a name at random here, Nature, which is the flagship, the gold standard of publishing of journals. So if I submit to Nature, I pay Nature $10,000, and then Nature, if it's accepted, of course, and then Nature sends it out to 3 reviewers. Those 3 reviewers don't get anything. They're doing it free of cost. So on the hope that, okay, when I submit to Nature, somebody will do it for me free of cost, basically. And Nature maybe is not the ideal example because they actually have editors on staff that they pay. So they have hired editors, but a lot of journals, they just if you're a professor or an assistant professor at a university, you're usually editor of some journal. And you're also sometimes doing that free of cost. So sometimes your editor doesn't get paid, the people who did the research don't get paid, the people who reviewed the research don't get paid, it's just the journal that gets paid. So maybe not the best system. I think there's some action being taken in the US where they're trying to break up these monopolistic publishing houses. But yeah.
But they charge actually $10,000.
Nature does.
Yeah, but how do they justify that? Because do they have that big an audience?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like how big? And their only source of income?
Everybody reads Nature.
Like everybody in the
field.
In the field.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
If you're.
And that's worldwide.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Because it's Nature. Like it's the place to be. Like if you're in fashion, it's Vogue. You know, it's that. So everybody reads it. But of course, even some other journals will charge you $2,000, $3,000, something like this. So what they call it, I don't know what Nature does, but most journals call it something, an open access fee. So basically they say, oh, publishing in our journal is free. So you can publish in our journal free of cost. But if you want people to be able to read it, then you're gonna have to pay us to make it freely available to everybody. Otherwise, each individual person is gonna have to subscribe to our journal, and then they can read it.
Okay, so now it's free for everyone to read.
if we pay the open access fee, yes.
Okay. And what are the, like, so their main source of money is taking money from people who are publishing,
Yes.
not the end, not the customer. Like, they don't have a monthly sort of thing.
Yeah, so most universities usually pay them. So
Okay.
if you're in a university, they usually are paying these big publishing houses. Most universities will have a contract with them. Or in some smaller countries, all the universities will get together, form a big group, and this big group will have a contract
Okay.
with these companies. So they're also getting paid through the universities, but then they're also getting paid through the researchers. Yeah.
And where are they headquartered?
It really depends. Different publishing houses in different places. Some in the Netherlands, some in the UK, some in the US.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's available in English in different languages.
Yeah, in English. I mean, when you're in science, you publish in English, because you
Okay.
want as many people to read it as
Yeah,
possible. Yeah. So I think we still have some Japanese and Chinese colleagues that publish in Japanese and Chinese. But nowadays, mostly everybody publishes in English.
And do you think someone like me would like to read the stuff?
Maybe a bit too technical, but usually in the big ones like Nature, for example, they try and make at least the introduction part accessible to as many people as possible,
Okay.
because they're wanting to attract as broad a readership as possible. So usually you can understand like the introduction part. Then of course when they go into the results and their materials and methods, then it gets a bit more technical, but usually we have a small summary at the top, which we call an abstract. And so that abstract, usually you should be able to understand the general gist of the research.
Okay. And these people published articles like on a daily basis, weekly basis? How does it work?
Yeah, so the magazine, it depends. It can be their weekly magazines, monthly magazines, biannual magazines, whatever. But
They must be having a website too, right? Where
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just online. So usually your article will be online, but then there will be one issue that it will be a part of.
Okay.
Like your article can go online anytime. Yeah, once it's approved.
And you also like done biomimicry, which that interested me a lot. So
Yeah.
can you just like tell me firstly why and why it's the field to be in, especially for you?
Yeah. Well, so it was also really cool for me because I didn't know a lot about biomimicry. So the idea of biomimicry again is just inspiration from nature. You mimic the way nature does things. And I thought it was really cool in the way it was explained to me by some professors, that you look at materials that we make. You have materials that are either tough or strong. So in English you use these words interchangeably, but in material science it's not. So a tough material is a material that doesn't shatter easily, basically. And a strong material is a material that doesn't bend easily. And these two things are usually in conflict with one another. So if you have something like glass, it doesn't bend easily, but it shatters really easily.
Yeah.
And if you have something like a beer can, an aluminum can, it bends very easily, but it doesn't shatter. And so these two things are always competing in man-made systems. So when you make a composite material, so when you take something that's brittle and combine it with something when you take something that's tough and combine it with something that's strong, both the toughness and the strength goes down usually, because then it doesn't remain as tough as it was and it doesn't remain as strong as it was. The new composite material that you've made has lower properties. It's the exact opposite in nature, where nature takes something that is not as tough and not as strong and makes something more tough and more strong. So something, and a good example of that would be your teeth, for example, or a seashell. So a seashell is made up 95% of chalk, like literally the chalk that we write with. But you look at chalk and it's really weak, it snaps very easily. Of course, you write with it, so it can easily be scraped off. But a seashell is quite sturdy. It doesn't come off it doesn't break that easily, And it's just the way nature builds things. So the idea basically being that they take these simple building blocks and they make something so unique with such extraordinary properties that we are not able to do. And it's because like I said, they've perfected it through evolution, but it's really the way they structure their materials. So it's all about how they put, where they put. Usually in nature, they use really, really, really small materials. So that helps them build these perfect structures. So that's why I thought biomimicry was very interesting.
Okay.
Did it make sense?
It did.
Okay.
Yeah. So where is it headed in the field?
I think it's headed in quite interesting directions. We have a lot of people working on like bioinspired electronics, bioinspired like composites for magnetic purposes, for packaging. There's a whole you name the field and there's something bioinspired happening there.
I mean, bioinspired electronics, what do you mean by that?
I mean, there's those electric eels, for example. These fish that can zap you.
Oh, okay.
Basically, yeah.
Those. So what do they do? How can they?
They basically have little batteries stacked on them. I mean, natural batteries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so one of the earliest batteries that was assembled also is very similar to that of the electric eel. So they basically just have power, and they. So there's a lot of stuff happening in bioinspired electronics. There's also stuff that they do with bio-based materials. So they're making paper-based batteries to replace like lithium, things like that. I think there's cool stuff happening. I'm of course not an electronics expert.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff in that direction.
And is that happening worldwide, or are there only pockets of the world where it's really thriving?
I mean, it really depends on the researchers that are experts. But of course, in the big universities, ETH, Oxford, Cambridge, MIT, that's where you'll see the most cutting edge work. But I think there's good work happening everywhere, really, in this regard.
And what about India? Do you have any idea?
I don't know a lot about India. We don't have a lot of collaborations with India. We have a few collaborations with China, and they're doing a lot of work there. But yeah, if I have Indian colleagues that see this and want to collaborate, would be very happy.
How can they find you?
On LinkedIn, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't give out your number.
Yeah, probably not.
and your Instagram.
No.
Unless you want to.
That's also not happening. No.
Is it a personal account or a public account yours?
On Instagram.
Yeah.
No, it's a private account. Yeah.
Private account. Okay. So should I put it in the bio at the end?
No.
Look at you, respecting your secrecy and your privacy so much.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting. But speaking of interesting, the Vince McMahon documentary.
Yeah, that's a pivot.
It's a big pivot.
Big pivot. Yeah.
Yeah. But as both of us,
my two loves, WWE and Biomimicry.
Yeah. I think we've covered most of what you wanted to in Biomimicry.
Right? Sure.
Like all the interesting stuff. Unless there's more interesting stuff I've not asked you about.
If Vince McMahon reminds me of something, I will tell
We shall see that. Yeah. But what were your initial thoughts? Because I think we had I quite liked it and you didn't really like it. So why was that?
It was just I feel like I had this phase in the pandemic where all I did was like listen to wrestling podcasts. So most of the stories I already knew. I listened to Jim Cornette. Yeah. Do you?
No, I didn't.
You've never listened to Jim Cornette?
No.
It's a lot of fun. Okay. It's also funny because he has the aesthetics and the sound of like the most conservative Republican man. But he's like a lefty social democrat, and he keeps ranting about like politics and wrestling. So yeah, he's a really funny guy, Jim Cornette. Anyway, so I had already heard most of these stories from him and from other wrestling podcasts. So it was really nothing new for me. But what was interesting towards the end is sort of like the father-son dynamic with Vince and Shane. I think that was really interesting. With Vince, the reason I didn't like this documentary as much as it was sort of billed as Vince McMahon talks to Netflix, so you're really going to find out what was going on in Vince McMahon's mind this whole time. And then like in the first or second episode he's like, I'm not going to tell you everything I think. I'm like, well, why am I here then, Vince? I could have watched this on the WWE network,
Because before it released, he had released a statement saying that I don't like how it's been presented, they didn't do this, but I didn't get that because he was there throughout to address whatever, and I think he was the last one interviewed because he was reacting to what others were saying.
Yeah, exactly.
So he had a chance to just set the record straight.
No, my theory is that he was going for this long arc story, that at the beginning he was trying to be all Logan Roy, like, it's me, it's my company, you don't like it. Look at me, this like terrifying asshole. But towards the end, I think there was going to be a redemption arc. That's why in like episode 4 or 5, you see like him and Shane and the whole, I love you, my son. My father told me I love me, whatever, what was going on there. And I think the end was supposed to be a pretty little bow on it, like, okay, he was a horrible man, but maybe there were some redeeming qualities. But then the sex scandal drops, and then the end of the documentary just turns into a hit piece because he did an awful thing, allegedly. So I think that's what sort of hurt him, is that he was being all tough in the beginning, and I think he was going to go soft in the end. But then the sex scandal dropped, and then it went away.
But he cancelled all his interviews. He could have. I don't know if that was based on legal advice. Probably must be.
Most likely. I mean, there's a federal indictment hanging over his head, so I think that was legal advice. And as we saw in the documentary, I don't think he does well in interviews, especially confrontational interviews. He would have probably thrown the paper back in Netflix's face or something.
But I was glad that Bret Hart was there, and I think I liked him the most in terms of.
I think he's my spirit animal, honestly. I think when I'm like his age, that's how I'm going to be, just cranky, done with stuff, you know. He's just. There's an old Bret Hart clip where he goes like, you know, in the WWE, when they're done with you, they take you out back and put a slug in the back of your head, and that's how Vince McMahon is. And he had another one where he said, when the screw job happened, he's like, I wouldn't piss on him if he was on fire or something like that. So I really appreciate Bret Hart.
That was like proper hate.
Yeah.
And then he also he lost his brother, so he.
Deservedly so. The hate, I would say.
He felt it was caused by. What do you think about that? Like, do you think there was anything shady, or do you think it was just as it was?
Well, there's investigation.
Firstly, can you explain what happened?
Sorry. Yes. So I think it was 97. 97, Bret Hart is working for Vince McMahon. There's what they call the Montreal Screwjob, where Vince McMahon sort of, in my opinion, cheats Bret out of the title. And Bret storms off, goes to WCW, which he was going to go in the first place. I don't think we want to relitigate the Montreal Screwjob right now. Yeah. But the impression grows with Bret and probably also with Owen that because there's this tension that Vince McMahon is sort of punishing him. And so he was made to do these ridiculous gimmicks. I think he was the Blue Blazer. Owen Hart was a really good wrestler, and he was made to dress up like this goof superhero. And in one of these things, one of his entrances, what he was supposed to descend from the sky, and I think the belt malfunctioned and he fell to his death essentially live on television. And Vince McMahon had the show go on. He didn't stop the show there. Which how do you do that? His excuse in the documentary was like, oh yeah, because the live crowd didn't see it. Yeah, so I think Bret Hart, I don't think was intentional, obviously. I think even Bret Hart very clearly states that, it was an accident. But Martha Hart, Owen's wife, has had a lot of investigations done where she believes that there was negligence on the part of not just the WWE, but also the company itself that did the rigging. She felt that they should have hired a more professional company that did all these things. So maybe they were just cutting costs. I don't know. I have no idea of the thing.
They could be because they weren't in a great state at that time, right? Their top talent was going to WCW. Ratings were bad. Yeah, and also it's Vince McMahon, he probably wants to cut a few corners here and there. I don't think he intentionally did it, obviously. And Vince also said that he would have continued the show if it was he was the one who died.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. Maybe if it was Shane, I would believe it.
Yeah, if it was Shane, it was,
with Vince, I don't believe it.
He would spin it as a PR thing also. He would say my son died, I still continue. That's how much I love the business and stuff like that.
That's what you would hear in this documentary. The show must go on.
And he'll be like, it must be a tragic moment for our family, but we still continued. We were crying backstage and all. And while he would just be thinking about how much money he was generating through.
Probably.
But I also didn't like the fact that Trish was the only diva who was there.
I mean, there's, one of the accusations also that he paid a WWE talent hush money, I mean, this kind of horn dog backstage, was he always gentle with all the women talent? Probably not.
Probably not. That's right. And there must be a few who've denied coming
even Trish in the documentary says that she was punished because she didn't want to make out with Mickie James.
Exactly. So, but do you think Vince had a say over who's going to come, the guests, or?
Probably.
He did,
Either he had a say or he recommended it. The thing with female talent is who would they interview who really had a connection with Vince at the time other than Trish?
But a connection is only in front of camera, right? Backstage there must be...
Backstage, sure, but in front of camera that the public would recognize,
Candice did.
Who?
Candice Michelle,
maybe, But again, that's too late in an era. Maybe they were talking more of Vince and Attitude era. And Ivory, Jacqueline, these people had nothing to do with Vince.
And getting Sable on didn't make sense because she is Brock Lesnar's wife.
Exactly.
So
yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I think she's also, just like Lesnar, very reclusive. I don't think she would want to come out on any of these shows now.
Yeah.
She's made her money. She has a rich husband. She's happy with her family. I don't think she wants to come out.
Probably,
and give these interviews.
But do you still think it was like a one-sided one, or do you think it was fair?
I think they were more than fair to him.
They were fair,
I think they were more than fair to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. This whole nonsense. Oh, it's a hit piece. No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in the beginning, I was like, what is this, a PR job? But they asked him, like, even in the interviews, they asked him like 2 tough questions. When he said, like, Ted's trying to put me out of business, and they told him, like, isn't that what you did to the territories?
Exactly.
That was like 1 or 2 tough questions he got asked, and even there he just could not answer. He would make a terrible politician. That's why his wife lost her Senate race, probably.
Oh, she ran for Senate?
Yeah, she ran for Senate in Connecticut against Chris Murphy,
Okay.
and she lost. And then she was in Trump's cabinet, Small Business Administration.
Oh, that I know. Yeah. But that's because of their connections, right? Vince and
they're
Trump's.
very good friends.
Yeah. Are they still to the date?
Yeah, absolutely. Linda is still. I think she runs the Trump Florida campaign.
Okay.
She's still very influential in the Republican circle. She will probably be in the cabinet again if Trump wins.
So now coming to that.
If Trump wins.
Is Trump gonna win?
Look at that pivot. Yeah.
It just fell into place perfectly.
It really did. Yeah.
What do you think? Is Trump gonna win?
I don't know, 50-50 I would say. If I had to lay a bet, I would say maybe Kamala more than him.
That's you wanting it.
I don't know if it's me wanting it. If you asked me even a month ago, I would say no, it's probably still Trump. But post that debate, I think she's...
But it surprises me that throughout Biden's candidacy, she was one of the most unpopular VP, and then suddenly she's...
I think it was sort of a factor of Biden being as unpopular as he was. She was...
But there was a point, I think her numbers were worse than his in terms of approval.
Yeah, I mean, because Biden has some appeal with some groups, and I don't think she even had that. But I think with Kamala, it was just a relief of like, okay, we're not going to die.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was. A lot of Biden's disapproval and Kamala's disapproval was not coming from like the general public. It was coming from Democrats themselves who were like, okay, I don't approve of this administration. I don't know what they're doing. And I think once Biden dropped out, even Democrats that were like, maybe this is not the best, were just like, okay, fine, at least we're not going to lose New York, because the way this man went after the debate, it was...
New York was suddenly a toss-up.
Yeah, exactly. It was curtains after he like rambled on like a senile man in that debate. So I think it was just relief for a lot of Democrats, being like, okay, fine, okay, we have somebody who can speak. And then she wins the debate, they're probably even more energized. And I think there's authentic constituencies that are excited for her, especially in labor in the US. She's very close with the Service Employees Union, for example, in California, the SEIU. The United Auto Workers have lined up behind her. I think her vice presidential pick helped with that, also exciting some of the both labor, teachers.
I think the progressives were more on board when J.D. Vance was... when Tim Vance was...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so
exactly.
You think that's another thing that's swung it in her favor?
I think she helped consolidate. Look, it's just a turnout game. Who turns out more of their people. I think with Biden, the problem was that Democrats were just so fed up that they were just going to sit at home.
Yeah.
And they weren't going to turn out. And I think she has now ensured that all the Democrats turn out. All the Republicans are going to turn out because Trump is going to do it, and then it's going to come down to 10,000 people in 5 states. That's how this election is going to be. Which is why I'm telling you it's going to be very, very close in my opinion.
But the thing with Kamala is that she was there in the administration and she's making promises. Like, why didn't you just do it in these last 4 years?
I mean,
people who are voting based on that, like, okay, these policy changes were promised and they didn't happen, and they're doing the same thing again, but it's the same person who was there in the administration.
Makes sense.
Like, Trump can again show that he's an outsider coming back, learned his lessons. Like, it didn't work last time because he was and people weren't happy. Now he can say, okay, this is what they've done and it's been worse, so I'm like the less worse candidate now.
Yeah, that's his point. Sure, but I would argue that I don't think it's been worse under Biden. It's just
probably
you look at the world, and the US has probably done the best compared to all the major developed countries in the world. Look at Germany, their GDP is falling. The US GDP is grown year on year, I think right now at 3%. They have really low inflation compared to the rest of the Western world.
But I'd say the same thing about India. And would you say that's a success?
I think the response to COVID in India was correct.
No, not COVID. I'm saying general GDP and inflation. Like if you're just
it's
judging
also
it based on that.
look, it's also a different story with India having a high GDP growth rate and the US having a high GDP growth rate.
Because
India
one's
is a
a
developing
developing country, yeah.
Exactly. We
Okay.
need a higher GDP growth rate.
Hmm.
With the US, 3-4% GDP growth rate is amazing.
Hmm.
And another thing that is working in Biden's favor for me is it's a full employment economy. It's really, really low unemployment, which is not something we've had in a really long time. It's the lowest unemployment since like the 60s, you know? So he has invested in actual industrial policy. He has onshore jobs. So yeah, I think there's still a lot to be done, but like all of the things that Kamala is promising, antitrust action against monopolies, bringing down the cost of insulin by negotiating with the pharmaceutical industry, the beginnings of that have been done in the Biden administration. The Biden Federal Trade Commission is good on monopolies. Biden has been good on labor. On the insulin or in the pharmaceuticals point, 10 pharmaceutical drugs and insulin has already been capped for senior citizens. Her point is just she will expand that to everybody. So I think there's a case that she can make as well, if she talks about the economics and less about the vibes. Yeah.
And what about the foreign policy? What do you think Biden's done?
Yeah,
Afghanistan, I think you would have liked.
I did.
That was
yeah,
a good thing.
I think it was the right thing to do to pull out of Afghanistan. Again, not a foreign policy expert, but just in my opinion, less foreign war is good.
Yeah.
I guess.
What about what they're doing with the Middle East?
Yeah, I think he has really LBJ'd his legacy in that. I think, in my opinion, very good on domestic policy. Screwed it up on like these wars.
But then Trump wasn't any. He wasn't
any better.
Yeah,
Absolutely
exactly.
not.
Neither
Yeah.
was Obama. Like
No.
they've just all been doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is my point. At least Biden had the courage to pull out of Afghanistan. And if you look back in time, that's when his approval rating really falls off the cliff. It's not with inflation. It wasn't anything. Inflation was bad even before Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But his approval rating was still fine. It was really the Afghanistan withdrawal and the media going after him for the withdrawal that tanks his approval rating, and it never came back up until now. You see his approval rating recovering now because people are like, okay, good, you're gone.
So now they're like, it's a sympathy sort of thing.
Like George Bush is at 50-something% approval today, you know. And if you look at back then, people were like,
Yeah, they hated him,
please
yeah.
leave. Yeah.
So October 1st, you're calling it for.
November 5th.
No, I'm saying today is October 1st, and you're calling it for the Democrats. You're calling it for Kamala.
Yes.
And how would you score it?
55-45.
55-45.
Yeah.
Popular vote, I think it's going to be. With
No, popular vote.
No, not the popular vote.
Oh,
I'm saying popular vote is going to be with them, but
yes,
the electoral college you're saying 55-45.
Yeah.
And which state do you think is going to win it? Wisconsin, Pennsylvania?
Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan. I think she's got a good shot in North Carolina.
Okay.
I don't think she'll pull off Georgia, but maybe.
Who got Georgia last time?
Biden did.
Biden got it.
Yeah.
So you think this time she'll lose it?
I mean, Biden won it by 10,000 votes.
Okay.
You know,
was that the one where they recounted it? They had done that in
when Trump wanted them to find the 11,000 votes. Yeah, that was Georgia. Yeah.
But I think for US's sake, it's good if it's going to be like a big margin so that there's no room for any. Because both
Which
sides
was the
are going
thing last time. You know, okay, you have to recount in Georgia. Okay, but he won Arizona, he won Nevada, he won Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. What is this one thing going to do for you?
And the percentage of voter fraud is very minimal compared to how they hype it up. Like whoever's going to lose it is going to hype it up way too much.
Exactly, but it's ludicrous to. I mean, there's going to be stray cases of voter fraud, but no election turns on 7 people in New York, you know.
Yeah. So then we're calling it for the Democrats. You are. I'm not.
No, I'm saying.
I want Trump to win. He's just too entertaining.
Okay,
I'm just talking about it from that point.
I'm not calling it for them. I said it's slightly more likely that they win than Trump wins.
Yeah, but you can't sit on the fence. You have to pick
one.
I
said okay. I think
So that's done.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good way to wrap things up.
Sure.
You don't want to give people your Instagram, but
I don't.
How do they LinkedIn? They just type your name.
Yes, they'll.
Actually, I had a problem finding you on LinkedIn myself, so just give them keywords.
Okay, or I'm Ash_Sin on Twitter.
Okay, so we'll put that. We'll also put the LinkedIn link in the description, so then people can reach out to you.
Yep.
And again, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
I've learned a lot about science.
Did you? Yeah.
I did quite a bit. Yeah. I'm a dumbass in terms of that, so thank you for that. And in case I have any more questions, I'm gonna just hit you up. Can fungi do this? Can mushrooms do this?
That's good.
I will. Okay. So you can be my mushrooms expert.
Perfect.
Yeah. The
not magic kind.
Not the magic kind. The proper mushroom.
Yes.
But yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. See you guys. Bye bye.
See you.